Fenton. I'm the Director of Emergency Services here in Northampton Township. I don't think I met Pete over here. I know Pete. But when you guys are all Township residents, or?
No.
No?
Newtown.
Newtown. Okay. All right. Well, welcome to Northampton. You're welcome.
But we cross over all the time.
Township resident or?
Southampton.
Southampton. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to tell all those people that I had that Newtown and Southampton residents. Well, again, Northampton. I'm the Director of Emergency Services. I also have the position of Fire Marshal. What I do is, as Emergency Management Coordinator, I'm responsible for development and management of emergency services. Career fire staff falls under me. We have a career fire program here in Northampton Township. Those are employees of my agency. I also administer the Township's Fire Prevention Code, responsible for conducting fire inspections, fire safety inspections, and investigations of all fires which occur within the jurisdiction. So those are my day-to-day duties. Emergency management is an ongoing process, as you'll see moving forward, how we tend to operate. And hopefully what I want to do is bore you with a little bit of death by PowerPoint on how we got to where we are in emergency management. Some of you may remember the days of hiding under desks, sheltering our bodies under desks during our school years. Some of us might be that old when we did things like that. And how emergency management has evolved based on the threats that we're currently dealing with. You probably heard my discussion with a woman here about pandemic flu episodes, and maybe we'll get into a little bit of that. We'll talk about how we got to where we're at, and then I want to round up with some website information that you can take advantage of. We can walk ourselves through some of the FEMA planning. There's really good stuff on community planning on FEMA's website, or not necessarily FEMA, but ready.gov is the best website, I would think. So we'll just walk you through if you haven't seen that, and walk through that. And the trailer is available. I want to thank the Lingahaken Fire Company, Chief James, and their Fire Marshal and Emergency Management Coordinator, Ted Middleman, is out there. They brought their fire safety trailer. Their trailer is unique in that it doesn't only do fire safety, it also simulates weather emergencies, which we're going to talk a lot about because I think that's probably the most realistic threat that we're going to be facing here. The weather impacts of weather-related events and how they impact our community. And the trailer is set up really for people to experience what a weather threat is, how a weather threat's transmitted through NOAA weather radio, things like that, and what would be appropriate responses for especially children in a home. So that's kind of good stuff. And you're more than welcome to take advantage of that. It only takes about 10 minutes or so to walk through there. And I think you can do a couple different things. It can simulate hurricanes, tornado warnings, severe thunderstorm warnings, flood warnings, things like that. So we'll move forward. Emergency management, it's developed, it's evolved. Emergency preparedness has evolved with it. We're now, it's more standardized than where it originated. But let's just take a look quickly at where we came from and how we got to where we are today. And how we arrived here. Like anything else in this country, emergency management and fire codes and things like that are responses to things that happen that were bad. Unfortunately, we don't change our fire codes until we have enough bad things happen, and then somebody says, oh, we really probably shouldn't do that anymore. A prime example is some of the major large loss of life fire situations that you may be familiar with in the past. Going all the way back to, go back to the 40s with the Circus Fire in Hartford, Connecticut. We can also look in the 40s and see the Coconut Grove nightclub fire in Boston, Massachusetts. Moving up as recently as the Station nightclub fire, Happy Land Social Club fire in Brooklyn, Beverly Hills Supper Club in Kentucky, all large loss of life fires that involve assembly type occupancies. And now our codes have finally responded where we're looking at the number of people that are in those occupancies and saying, hey, we really need to have sprinkler systems, we need to have emergency egress in accordance to design to handle the loads there, the occupant loads in those occupancies. And it's a response to disasters. Well, same thing with the development of emergency management. I started off with, some of us can remember in the years back, in the 50s, the threat was what? Nuclear war. All right, so we trained and we drilled. Emergency management really was about not so much weather-related preparedness like we talk about today, but it really was, homeland defense. Before that, obviously with the World War before that, there was concerns with, invasion of enemy forces. And, in the 50s, obviously with the advent of nuclear weapons, that was the threat. And up until about the 60s, the late 60s, that was pretty much what the focus of emergency management was. Fallout shelters, having fallout shelters. People were building bomb shelters in their backyards. I think also the community, the residents in our communities have changed. Back then, they were very self-reliant, much more self-reliant than they are so today. I think people were prepared to be without electricity for several days, because it probably failed fairly regularly because the infrastructure wasn't as robust as it is now. It was probably a pretty regular thing to lose power on a farm in Northampton back in the 50s or 40s, and people just dealt with it. Today, we are so wrapped up in the instantaneous need. Everybody wants to go out to the food store today and have, get fresh food, and doesn't really have a supply of food or on hand. We're reliant on those things, and when they go away, our community tends to have problems, and that's where emergency management, and that's where community planning, and that's really going to be the focus of this presentation, the things we need to do to prepare for those events that disrupt our normal day-to-day lives. So the government didn't really get involved in emergency management until a few instances. The first organized fire company, we're all here local, was Ben Franklin and the Union Fire Company in Philadelphia, where Mr. Franklin recognized that there was a need to provide a service to the community, and the fire protection benefited everybody in the community. If one person had a fire and it spread to the next person's fire, it became more of a problem, and the fire became larger and larger. It would disrupt commerce. It would, you could disrupt the mercantile establishments, the business establishments, and the homes. So Ben Franklin organized the Union Fire Company to be an efficient way of combating fires in the city of Philadelphia, and obviously that grew. There were several others in a short period, and that became the model for fire. But I think that's probably the first effort at organized emergency management here in the United States. Maybe you could look at some of the defense for Indians, and things like that as the colonies were evolved. But that would be considered the first organized effort of emergency management. The government, our founding government really separates the military and the government from getting involved too heavily in personal involvement, personal property. But the Congressional Act of 1803, local disaster in New Hampshire, provided financial assistance to a government in New Hampshire to recover from the fire. That's probably one of the first examples of the government actually responding in a financial support mechanism to support the local communities. The VODs, we were talking earlier about some of that. VODs, volunteer organizations assisting in disasters. The predominant one is that you most probably heard about is going to be the American Red Cross. And certainly, if we have an event here, you're going to see the Red Cross in all probability, along with other agencies. And I think the next slide we'll probably look at some of those. How they assist, what they do in the instances that I've been involved with the Red Cross. They've been involved with helping people get back on their feet after a major fire. They provide temporary shelters. They'll actually put people, if we have we're kind of unique in Northampton in that most of our community will find a place to stay after a fire. But occasionally we do have someone that doesn't have a place to go. We have the capability to call the Red Cross, and they'll actually put that person up in a local hotel. They have pre-existing agreements with the hotels and motels in the area. They can provide immediate assistance in that respect. And disasters, floods, I've seen them give out things like kits, basic kits for people to get back, start cleaning up their homes. Things as simple as bleach, a bucket, brooms, and shovels to start clearing out debris to get back on your feet. Those are the things that the American Red Cross does, as well as their blood drives and things like that. But in the disaster assistance, that's where you expect to see them here in the larger disasters. Let's see, all right, I'm going to take a look at some of the other agencies that may be here, and I have actually seen some of these here. Some of them you may not be familiar with, but there are a lot of volunteer organizations. Many of them are faith-based, and they will contact our state emergency management. We'll go through that emergency management command structure in a little bit, but they will come in and offer their services. We have had, in my personal experience, we've had we had one of the Jewish organizations in one of the floods, the larger floods. Mennonite Disaster Service has been in Bucks County. Lutheran Disaster Response has been in Bucks County. I thought it was. So some of these things, they're out there. These are agencies that are out there assisting on a voluntary basis that can provide assistance. Some of them will provide basic reconstructive services for homes that were damaged in a disaster, things like that. Salvation Army has been in, obviously in town. United Way, more for financial assistance for them. But those are some of the agencies that, in what we call VODE, volunteer organizations assisting in disasters. Go back to the presentation here. The Evolution of Emergency Management, the Flood Control Act in 1917 established a mechanism for floods. Floods were very common. Floods are very common. Probably, I would say here between that and major snow events that cause massive power interruptions, our flooding is one of our predominant hazards that we're concerned about. The Flood Control Act enabled the Army Corps of Engineers to engineer systems of dams throughout the country to control the floods. And they've been very, very effective. And that happened as early as 1917. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation originated in 1932 and basically allowed the federal government to disseminate, economic assistance to the communities that were affected by disasters. And I think what you see, the outflow of that, it says by 1957, remaining functions have been transferred to other agencies. Anybody know of one agency that would be very active in a local disaster? Small Business Administration, very active. They can come in and they can write not only low interest loans for businesses, but also to residents that are affected by disasters. And a common misconception is that when we get a declaration of disaster, that's going to allow money to flow directly from the federal government into people's hands. That doesn't really happen. In some cases, like the major Sandy, like this most recent event in the Sandy, there was some direct economic assistance provided, but it's not. There's an expectation that some people that they're going to get immediate financial assistance, and that's just not happening. You may get an opportunity to apply for a small business association loan. You may get some assistance from the state. But there's not a lot of direct financial assistance. Disaster Relief Act, states issue disaster declaration. So we're moving towards a mechanism, an established mechanism that allows the states to declare a disaster or local government to declare a disaster and request assistance moving up the chain of command. Federal Civil Defense Act, 1950. Again, that's a lot directed towards the threat of nuclear war, and you still in the larger urban environments, you'll still see the civil defense chevrons that are up that indicate the presence of a fallout shelter. We had one in Northampton here, the basement of the Villa Joseph Marie. At the time was a St. Joseph home, actually. It was designated as a fallout shelter, and these fallout shelters were equipped with water, sanitary supplies, basic medical supplies to support a number of people based on their size in the event of a nuclear war. And the people in the country were putting bomb shelters in their backyards. That was pretty common. Some of those still exist. National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP. Something that's managed at the local level in Northampton Township by our Code Enforcement Department and Zoning Office. These are the established floodplains. In order to get flood insurance for your home from a creek or a river or drainage swale, you have to be in a designated floodplain. If you're not in that floodplain, you're not really going to you can't get flood insurance. You can get things for like sump pump insurance for backups if you have like water infiltration through the groundwater. You can get insurance from floods from broken water pipes in your home, things like that. But in the event of a flood, unless you're in a floodplain and have purchased flood insurance, you're probably going to find that your insurance coverages are not going to be there for you. So if you think there's a flood issue, check number one with your insurance companies and make sure that you do have adequate coverage. Most of the floods are, those floodplains, they do move them periodically, they adjust them. There was just a recent adjustment here in Bucks County, I don't know, last year I think it took effect. But the lines are fairly well established and have been for some time. If you're living in a floodplain, you're going to know it. You're going to know where it is on your property. Evolving furthermore towards FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Some measures of response to the hurricanes of the 70s, Agnes and Donna and some of those. Oil Pollution Act, Exxon Valdez brought in the Coast Guard to assist in navigable waterways. And believe it or not, the Coast Guard, we see them in Northampton because the Neshaminy Creek is a tributary to a navigable waterway. So we can actually get federal involvement for instances where the Neshaminy Creek is involved. And probably that extends all the way up into the tributaries. So the valid, a good assistance force. Federal response plan, and then September 11th, 2001, obviously was a significant test for emergency management agencies in several areas of the country. We now have a national, what we call the National Incident Management System, or NIMS, and that's a series of presidential directives which direct how a community has to respond. And to break it down in the most simple fashion, it standardizes things like terminology, it standardizes communications, and it allows us to work together as a mutual aid. Community to state, state to fed. It types resources, things like trucks, so there's a commonality of these terms. When you ask for, a truck of such and such a size, you get a truck of such and such a size, you know what you're going to get. Establishes protocols for communication between agencies, police departments not being able to talk to fire departments, establishes protocols for how that's done. Believe it or not, up until in Northampton, we've had good communication capability, but there were many areas of the country, specifically in New York during 9/11, the fire department, police department couldn't talk together. So communications is a huge part of community emergency management. The SBA, we talked about the SBA a little bit. Emergency management is constantly functioning in one of these. It used to be 4 cycles, now it's 5. Okay, so we're prevention, mitigation, and preparedness kind of mixed together, but we're constantly functioning in one of these 5 cycles here: prevention or mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. Prevention. What is an example of prevention from emergency management? Let me take an example. How about a flood engineering project? If we know we have a creek that repeatedly floods, we can possibly incorporate engineering to control the flood and stop it from flooding. Mitigation, that's kind of the same thing, like maybe elevating a house. If a flood, and rather than relocate the creek, you can relocate the house out of the floodplain. In Northampton, we had a number of homes which were either eliminated through mitigation programs. They just knocked the house down, gave the people a fair market value, and now it's county park property. Or they elevated the house above the floodplain level. Those are mitigations. So those are things that are done pretty much based on disaster history of your respective communities. Preparedness. Well, those are the things that we're doing now. Those are ongoing efforts to respond to the threats that are in your community. We'll talk about what those threats are, and how we look at those and how we prioritize. Response, that's the actual response for emergency management. That's when we're out there doing our thing, our fire people are engaged, our police people or EMS, depending on the nature of the emergency. Those are the times when That's considered response. And then recovery is obviously the efforts, how do you recover from a flood, the things that happen, getting people back into their homes, getting businesses back open, getting power restored, getting infrastructure that's been damaged by the flood. And then after the recovery stage, we're going back in and we're looking at the things that happened and saying, all right, what can we do from a prevention standpoint, from a mitigation standpoint, to prevent those things from happening in the future. And the best example I give you that is the flood buyouts, which occurred in this county in a number of areas. Northampton being only one of them. Middletown experienced a lot of them. Upper South had some. Bristol and Salem properties were all affected. So they just bought them out. The county came in, they secured federal hazard mitigation grants, and they came in, they bought the properties out, and many of them, like in our case, some of them are on Langhorne Avenue, if you're familiar with that. It's off Bridgetown Pike. They just bought them out, and they're just considered parkland now. So what do we do? How do we determine what's what's a hazard for us to be concerned about? We use what's called an all hazards approach. In other words, we don't target one specific hazard. We look at all the possibility, all the threats that are out there for us, as best we can. We utilize what's called a hazard vulnerability analysis, or an HVA. Hazard vulnerability analysis, risk assessment, are systematic approaches to identifying hazards or risks that are most likely to have an impact on you and the surrounding community. So we identify what those hazards are. We classify them based on severity. Probability is a big thing, and also timeline for onset. Do we get a warning? Do we get a warning on some of these things? Some of them we do. I mean, a snowstorm, we pretty much are bombed by our local media that tell us it's going to snow and the end of the world's coming. So pretty good indication that major snowstorm's coming. A tornado, maybe not so much. It could be associated with a weather front that's coming through rapidly. Not so much notice for those timelines. But then we're back to the probability. The last tornado in Northampton may have been a straight line wind, may have been an F1 tornado, a very small tornado, probably 20 years ago. Probability, not so much. But those are the kind of things we look at in the HVA. And we say, well, yeah, could a tornado be severe? In our area of the country, a tornado could be very severe. It would have to land on your house, but it's probably going to be relatively short duration. It's probably going to be confined to a relatively smaller area. Now, if that was in a densely populated development, it's going to make a mess. But it's probably not going to affect everybody in the community. It's going to be in that surrounding area. How we do this, how emergency operations work. Well, it's a downward flow and an upward flow. It all starts in Northampton Township. We really are, when the stuff really hits the fan, we're really on our own, to be honest with you. When it gets to such events of such magnitude, resources are stretched very thin, and really we're on our own for some time before we would be able to get additional assistance. So starts with Northampton Township, flows upwards to the County Emergency Management Agency, or BUCS, BCEMA. So Northampton Township Emergency Management Agency. The County Emergency Management Agency exists to support the needs of the county, and when incidents involve more than one jurisdiction. And that could be as simple as making sure that one jurisdiction isn't sucking up all the resources that are available from agencies above. Example of that would be National Guard resources. Let's say we had a major snowstorm, we needed the services of the Pennsylvania National Guard. The governor authorized their deployment, and they had 10 trucks available, 10 Humvees. I'm just going to use Humvees because everybody knows what they are. They're military trucks. And we wouldn't want them all assigned to one area of the county. So the county may exercise coordination to make sure those resources were adequately deployed throughout the county, and not one agency was sucking them all up. So that's how the county functions. The county is designed so that if we have unmet needs as a local agency or a local community, our first call is to the county. We do have a resource guide, but it pretty much mirrors the county. I mean, you can only have so many vendors for refrigerated trailers. There's only so many in the area. So the county's resource list pretty much serves as ours. And we would make those requests to the county, and if they didn't have access to them, they would make those requests to the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, which coordinates all their resources statewide, and then up to the federal government. and then it flows downward from the federal government to the local agency. FEMA goes to FEMA. We don't really get directly involved with FEMA until they come out and start doing damage assessments and things like that. But our communications, we're not communicating directly with FEMA. Our communications are going to the counties are going to the states are going to FEMA, and vice versa. So it's part of that NIMS, National Incident Management System, which defines the communication flow and structure of emergency management. Our Township Emergency Operations Plan is very thin, and it's thin by design because I could write a plan that would be this thick and try and figure out our response to every specific thing, single thing that could happen, and it wouldn't be worth the paper that it was printed on when that event actually occurred. So it defines the levels of authority, who's in charge, what specific roles and responsibilities they have. We have certain components in there that really are not activated on a regular basis, and we were just having this discussion about, I've had people come in and say, I want to get involved, and that's good, and I appreciate their willingness to do that. But because of the infrequency of major activations for those positions, like the medical director's position, we just don't have, a disaster on those type.
Send them our way, we'll take them.
Well, and I never really have. I've tapped a couple.
Well, I'm just saying though, we take volunteers.
Right. But it's hard for us at a local level to keep their interest, just because we just don't have a lot of opportunity. Communications is one. We have a great communications guy, but most of our communications are handled through the day-to-day emergency communication system of the fire department, the police department, and AMS, and the municipal government. So it's not often that we have need to establish that link through ham radios to get to the county, because we can just pick up our radios. Cell phones have done a lot for us. We're very reliant on that. Now that's a hole in the system because we're so reliant on that technology that's there most of the time. It's when that technology fails that we have a need to get into those other agencies. Wrapping this up, because I know I bored you with that PowerPoint, we want to talk about what you can do as a community to develop your own hazard vulnerability analysis or your own emergency operations plan for yourself and your family. And I would suggest that we use ready.gov, www.ready.gov, and these are the things that you should be doing. Taking a look at what your specifics are. Do you have children? Do you have children in school? Do you have a plan to communicate with them in the event that you guys get separated by a major event that occurs? I think our school district does an excellent job, and I'm sure that in your respective districts, if you have children there too, they do a similar job as Council Rock. But our school district does a very good job of communicating with the parents. They have the same phone notification system that we use in the county, which is Everbridge. We'll get to that in a second, which is Ready Bucks. Here's some guidelines on what you should be doing. Seniors, emergency operations, your emergency plan should include things like, what are you going to do? I mean, if you are in your home and you can't get out of your home for several days, do you have enough food to survive for a couple of days? Or do you have a place you can go to get assistance, maybe a neighbor or a relative? Do you have enough medications going into the incident? Generally the snowstorms, like I said, those are the things that tie us up in our neighborhoods. We get a blizzard, we're very accustomed in Northampton. I can't say enough about our snow removal capabilities, but there are storms that exceed the norm. It's those 3-foot storms with winds, icy conditions, things like that. It's going to be longer. It's not going to be usually you go to bed, you wake up in the morning, your street's blocked, maybe in your driveway, and you have to shovel that out. But in Northampton, usually that's the case. Within 24 hours, our streets are open. But there are those times, and they've been, Pete remembers the 93 blizzard. We've had the 93 blizzard, the 96 blizzard, the 94 ice storms. There were those times where it took several days to get some of our streets opened up. People couldn't get to the grocery stores. So having a food supply, having a plan to deal with that. Emergency power. What are you going to do if many areas of our community are provided with public water? So when the power goes off, you still have your water. But what if you live in an area where you have a well? You're relying on your own electricity to pump the water from your well. Things are going to get a bit dicey in your home without having capability to flush the toilet, to get fresh drinking water. So you need to have that, that incorporated into your plan. Medicines, if you're on any type of medicines and you need replenishment of those medicines, you should have a supply of those, going into that storm. Know that you have, a week's worth of medicine to get you through, so you don't have to run out in the middle of the storm or find a way to get out. Power. Some people are reliant on power for their emergency medical equipment. A classic is an oxygen concentrator. Folks have those. I can't tell you how many calls I get the day before a hurricane is supposed to strike the area of people saying, I'm on an oxygen concentrator, I need a place to go if the power goes out. Well, the time to be thinking about that is right now, when it's, July, summer and the power's on, and you should be making those plans to have the capability for that. I've had people call up and say, yeah, I need a generator delivered to my house because I'm on an oxygen concentrator. We don't have that capability. There's no bank of generators in Northampton Township waiting for disposition. There are 13,500 homes. We couldn't afford to build a building to stack 13,500 generators, and no one would want to live here because the taxes would be incredible if we bought 13,500 generators and had them available for distribution to the residents. Great concept, but not really realistic. So you should, if those things are, you are in need of those things, you should have that capability. Animals, okay? What are you going to do with your dogs, cats? People love their pets. You should have some type of plan that, to deal with those. We've had people, we occasionally do open up a shelter here, and this room actually is our designated shelter for Northampton. We have capability in other areas, but this is really the only area, this room right here, where we have cots where they're contained in that back room there. If we have need to open up a shelter, this is our first shelter that we open. Our findings with that typically have been, though, that people really don't want a shelter. They'd really rather stay home, and even though their home is maybe cold and dark, they'd really rather be home rather than a room like this next to a guy like me, because I snore a lot. So people really want a place where they can come. If their power's been out for a few days, they can come, they can charge their cell phone, they can get a cup of coffee, they can warm up, talk to people, maybe get on the internet at the library, and we found that that's been very well received by the community. So we're trying to do more of that. Our current plans are to equip the rest of the building with emergency power, so we'd have capability throughout the building, and we can open the whole library up. Right now, it's just this section of the building. But again, those things take financial resources, and they're significant. We're well ahead of many communities in that regard. So I would encourage you. I don't really want to bore you with walking through these plans. Ready.gov, it will guide you in how to prepare a plan for your home. Communications plan, it walks you through how you communicate, or how you would communicate if your family got separated, things like that. It makes recommendations for what a home should have for basic emergency survival supplies, things like that. And lastly, emergency notification. Part of Ready.gov. ReadyPA is a site that you can go on and register for notifications. You can register for any notification that you want, weather notifications, road closure notifications, things like that. And it will send you an email, a text message, or in some cases a voice message to your cell phone, whatever media you select. If you put your cell phone in there, it's going to call you. So if there's important information that needs to be disseminated in a timely fashion, you can select what emergencies you want to be notified of. The county also has capability, and we through the township have capability to notify all of you in your homes via your home phone line. If we have an incident that needs to be, emergency information needs to be put out, I'll give you an example. Would be maybe a wanted subject, an armed subject in an area where the police are engaged in a manhunt, and we needed to tell people, stay inside, keep your kids inside, keep your doors locked if there's police activity. and we need to do that. We can actually literally go to a county map, draw a geographic shape around the area we want to notify, and it will call everybody within like 2 minutes in that geographic area with either with a recorded message, either one of the synthesized ones which are annoying, or we can record a message and have that message delivered to that phone system. That's independent of whether or not you're recognized or you're registered on Ready PA. That will work at any time. But I do want to walk you through that Ready PA thing. Oh, water's not open. Go back. Invitation. That's the one I want. So that's the address. www.buckscounty.org/readybucks. If you go to that website and select register and enter your information, you will be included in any notifications that you select. You can go to your own community, Upper Southampton. You may want to select an adjoining community and receive information from that. Personally, I am very, very cautious on how I use this because we get too many, all of us get too many phone calls on our cell phones and in our houses. And my feeling is that we really need to preserve that for a true emergency. Otherwise, people just won't answer the phone when a true emergency is presented. So I am very, very conservative on when we have activated that. I don't think I've ever activated it. We had earlier systems used to interrupt the cable. We no longer have the capability to do that. The federal government can do that. The state can do that through the emergency alert network, emergency alert system. But we can't. We no longer have capability to do that. So just wanted to wrap this up by pretty much throwing out a Q&A as to anything that questions that you have or may have about emergency preparedness, what things, resources you need, things you can do. Any questions? So we do have our fire safety trailer out in front, and it's also go on out. You guys been to fire safety trailer before? So you know how it works? You don't get scared, just think about your plan. So you see a little bit of smoke, you don't get scared here. It just helps you think about what you're going to do if you really have to know. You guys all have working smoke detectors at home?
I just checked it.
Perfect.
I checked it on water working.
That's why we check, right? Wow. Wow.
Crazy about smoke.
Why not get the advanced 30 seconds?
Exactly.
That might be what you need to survive.
Yep. I don't think you're crazy.
Yeah, I said that to somebody else, so I figured it out.
Unfortunately, we see the result if someone doesn't have it.
Yeah. Mine was off the track.
All right. Good seeing you.
Get the hose line out. You're going to aim, squeeze, and sweep it. So we're going to go squeeze that down, sweep it. That's not working. That works. Where the green is obviously where it's aiming at. So what we want is one of your parents to be operating the fire extinguisher. And what would we want you two to be doing?
Getting out.
Get it out. Exactly. All right. So Dad or Mom, if you want to take one of these.
I know, he would.
Like, I don't want to do that.
Okay. Pull them in. You're already squeezing it. It would be in the ceiling.
Even if facing the fire?
Oh, I'm up here.
There you go. Good. Now you have the fire down.
Hey, you two need to jump out of here.
Even if this still happens and you do knock it down yourself, you still want to call 911 to the fire department. So we'd rather us come for 20 minutes and say, good job.
Right, just go right to the middle of the door. If the middle of the door is hot, let me go down. That's my step. You don't have to bend down, because then you're losing time. You have to bend down, you have to get up. In the middle of the door, it's hot, you just block it up. In the middle of the door, it ain't hot, you'll touch the bar. Man, I just wish you could this.